Okay, listen up. This is the best way to immediately improve your marriage. Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Jenkins, a professional psychologist. I've worked for over 3 decades now with couples and relationships. The formula I'm going to share with you will seem counterintuitive at first, but stick with me because I've got some guaranteed principles to share with you. I told you it seems a little counterintuitive at first. Our first step is to check in with our focus. And here's what I'm thinking. Your assumptions, your beliefs, your thoughts matter. And they matter a whole lot because it changes how you feel and it changes how you show up. The biggest barrier to improving a marriage that I have seen in my career is the assumption or the thought or the belief that my spouse needs to change something. Check in with that. I'm inviting you to just notice that that might be where your mind is. And it's so common. It's not your fault. It's traditional thinking to assume that this marriage needs to have some change from my spouse in order for things to be okay. That is so traditional and it's so common. I'm inviting you to just notice it at this point, because if that's your focus, we have a little problem. And the problem goes to the psychology of how people feel when somebody else thinks that they need to change. Think about it for yourself. If I were to come to you and say, you know what, there's just some things that you really need to change, that you really need to work on. And this is all going to be so much better when you start behaving better. All right, now how are you feeling as I approach you that way? Do you notice it? Do you notice just a little bit of, a little defensiveness maybe? A little bit of resistance to what I'm going to say next? A little bit of, Dr. Paul, get out of my face. You don't know me. All right? Just notice that that triggers some feelings in you. Guess what? In a marriage, your thought that your spouse needs to change creates resistance and defensiveness in them. And it's not that you're wrong. I mean, I'm going to give that to you, okay? You're actually probably right. Things would be better if your spouse would shape up. That happens to be true. But it's not useful because of the emotional impact that it has. And there was some research on this. If you've looked up ever Dr. John Gottman, go look him up. You'll find him right here on YouTube too. Dr. John Gottman did this groundbreaking research. It was probably over 30 years ago now, where he found that roughly 70% of the conflicts or problems in a marriage are unresolvable. And it's because in conflict situations, the natural psychological response is to ask, who's to blame for this? And when we do that, it becomes really obvious really fast that it's our spouse that's to blame for this. And we identify what they could or should do better. Now, what Gottman found in the research is that anytime criticism is perceived, and criticism doesn't have to be real or intended, as long as it's perceived, it works and it triggers a natural response in the person who's feeling criticized. Defensiveness. Defensiveness then leads to kind of a counterattack. And that leads to turning away from each other. Gottman called this the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And it starts with the criticism. Here's why we put this right up front in step 1, because your thoughts about this matter. And as long as you think that your spouse needs to change something, it's going to work counter to what you're trying to accomplish. It will actually make things worse, not better. That's why we're starting there. And I acknowledge to you that it felt counterintuitive because you're actually right that things would be better if your spouse improved. But that's not helpful because it gets us into that negative dynamic. You with me? The second step in this 3-step formula is to learn the principles that actually bring about success in a relationship. There are 9 proven, guaranteed principles. When I say proven and guaranteed, sometimes people get a little skeptical. Oh, here's a psychologist giving a guarantee. The principles don't work unless you do. In fact, some people ask me, will this work for me? No, this won't work for you, but you can work with this because you're the one who's going to apply them. And if you apply these principles, I guarantee success. Listen to what I'm saying. And I have seen some goofy stuff over almost 3 decades now of clinical experience. I have seen some goofy stuff. And I guarantee that when you apply these principles, you can have successful outcomes. We don't have time to go into all the principles on this particular video today, but I've captured them for you in just a quick PDF format. You can print it out. You can hang it on your wall. drpauljenkins.com/9 principles. You see the URL right there on your screen. Just go pick it up. Tell me where to send it. I'll put it right in your inbox. 9 principles. Remember, they're guaranteed. You apply these principles, you're going to have some successful outcomes. And if you don't, challenge me on it. Let me know, hey, I did this thing, but it didn't work. Usually what happens is people don't do it. And then, of course, it doesn't work. Or they keep trying the old stuff, the criticism, the blame, the defensiveness, all of that. You know, when I first learned about these 9 principles, I went to a conference. I spent, I think, 2 days in this conference with the Gottmans, learning about the research that they had done on the criticism, that negative pattern that I described to you earlier. And at the end of the conference, I went home and I was having a little conversation with Vicky about what I had learned, and I was sharing some of my notes from the meeting and things like that. And she summed it up. She grabbed it beautifully as she said, oh, so do more of what works and less of what doesn't. Is that what you learned in a couple of days in this conference? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Do more of what works and less of what doesn't. What doesn't work? Criticism. What does work? 9 principles. Go get the PDF. You're going to be blown away by the simplicity and the power of these 9 principles. Just go get it. drpauljenkins.com/9 principles. Now, I can't just give you the 9 principles without a warning. And this is step 3, actually, of our 3-step formula. Remember, quick recap. Step 1, turn on the metacognition. Think about your position. Are you taking a position that your spouse needs to change something? If so, be aware of it. Maybe change that up, because that's counterproductive. Number 2, learn the principles, specifically the 9 principles that I offered you in that free handout. So go grab that. Now here's step 3. Be careful, all right? Because I've just given you 9 power tools. And I know enough about power tools to know a couple of things. First of all, they don't work unless you plug them in and turn them on, all right? So once you get these 9 principles in your hand, plug them in and turn them on. That's what power tools are for. Power tools get the job done so much more quickly than other alternatives. And power tools are dangerous. Now, you might think I'm kidding about that. I'm not. These are dangerous power tools when they're not used properly and according to the safety guidelines. I remember one of my clients coming to see me. He had some post-traumatic stress because he had accidentally cut off half of his hand with a saw, a power saw. Power saws are powerful and they're dangerous. These tools are too. I sent a couple home from my office to memorize these 9 principles, and that's usually the assignment that I give when I'm doing couple coaching. Memorize the 9 principles. Commit them to memory. I sent them home to do that. I forgot to give them the safety guidelines. And they came back a week later worse than they were when I saw them the first time. Worse. Why? Because they immediately took these 9 principles and started to criticize and blame each other for not living up to the 9 principles. Okay, and now we're off to the races. Criticism, defensiveness, contempt. These power tools are for personal use only. Will you please write that in big letters in whatever notes you're taking? Personal use only. They are not to be used on your spouse. These are not things that your spouse could or should be doing better. Yes, acknowledged. Things would be better if your spouse did improve. That's true, but it's not useful. As soon as you identify, even in your own thinking, you don't even have to say it out loud, but as soon as you identify what your spouse could do better, it creates an energy where they are more likely to feel criticized, and then we're off to the races. Okay, it doesn't work. That's more of what doesn't work. These are for personal use only. So here's how I want you to use those 9 principles. Look over the list. Ask yourself, which of these 9 principles can I apply? And then you start working on that. I guarantee you're going to find 2, 3, 4, maybe 9 that you could be working on. Look, we all have room for improvement. This will tell you what direction you can put your efforts to immediately improve your marriage. Use this 3-step formula. And although it seems a little counterintuitive at first, you can see the power of it. Start to apply those principles. Use the safety guidelines. You've got this. You can see that a lot of what we talked about here has to do with personal development, and that's the best way to improve your relationships. Cue up that next video, how to reprogram your own mind to stay strong and positive. You're going to get more ideas about how you can power up every aspect of your life. I'll see you there.